All right. Well, welcome to those who are here right now. I see some various folks besides Knuckles people. Good morning to you all. Thank you for being here, Gail, Santy. It's been nice working up to this, and I'm excited about talking about collection development. And like I just mentioned, and having this resource on our website so that when people do come to that point and want to talk about collection development, they're ready to go. I will try to remember this at the end of the meeting because I want to talk about it after we get through. I think she'll mention Musty today. We are having our version of an ugly sweater contest at the director meeting in December. So I don't see directors here. So that would mean that Linwood, Atchison, and Baldwin, bring this back to your directors to tell them that we're having a contest for whoever finds the mustiest book, and if that doesn't make sense, it should later. So whatever the most, pardon the expression, god-awful book that you can pull out of your collection, we will have a contest. You can post a picture of it, and then we'll let the directors vote. And I think grand prize will be 50 or more. So not an unsubstantial amount of money in gift card form. So with that, keep in mind about the mustiest book contest, and it can be any media, I should say. So if it is a video, that is perfectly fine as well. Any other business before we let, good. She's already got some submissions in Atchison. So take some photos of those and have them ready to go. And we'll have a place for you to post them to the website, or just email them to me as soon as you have them. And I'll make sure that we get them so they're ready to be voted on in our early December public library director meeting. Jesse, anything that I haven't covered? We have George here who will speak a little bit at the very end about how you might use some reports in Next. But if no further ado, we have from CKLS, the system director, Gail Santy. So thank you so much for being here. And I will mute myself so that I stop talking and making noises.
I'm just Gail. That's who I am. I'm Gail. CKLS is having an ugly sweater contest, and I hadn't thought about Musty, but I have my top winners that I'll show you before I start. The Complete Book of Mopeds. A horribly scary one, Does AIDS Hurt? I just took this out of a library last year, and it was published in 1992. A Bruce Jenner book, which is a little bit old as well, but here is my most favorite, Arlene Dahl's Always Ask a Man. And there are really good suggestions to ask the men in your life to run everything for you. That's my favorite. And that actually, these have all come off of library shelves, so you know how that can go.
I wish I could have gotten a screenshot of Anna's face when you said that.
Yes. Those are my favorites. I have others. I do think Patty Collins, who is our youth services consultant, she might win because she has Sex and the Single Librarian that showed up on her desk one day from a library weed. Anyhow, I am Gail Santy. I'm glad to see the room starting to come in. And I'm here to talk to you about collection management. And I'm going to get going because I'm going to talk a little bit quickly because I want to leave plenty of time. Dan has some things he wants to do, but I want you to unmute yourself and ask a question right away, or go ahead and put it in the chat. And if I can't know who's going to be in charge, but if one of my Nichols folks will say, hey, you've got a question in the chat, that'll work.
We will do that. And we stole this from CKLS as well. If for some reason you don't want your identity and you want to ask a question, just shoot me a message, but you might remind me, hey, private, ask for me, because sometimes there are questions that people, I feel stupid if I'd ask it. So yes, let me ask your question and you don't have to be your identity given away. So.
Yes. Okay. I've not ever figured out the pretty way to do this, but away I go. And I have to talk myself through it every time. Okay. This one is heavily focused on weeding with some other stuff. And that's what this presentation is about, to weed or not to weed. I'm gonna click through, there we go. The collection management is a cycle. It starts with selecting and acquiring which books you're going to add to the collection. Then you catalog and process them. and then they move out for circulation. And the last step of the cycle is weeding. A lot of libraries forget that last cycle. Without it, it's not a full circle. It's just a circle with a big, big piece of pie missing. Weeding is every bit as important as circulating your books, cataloging them, and making the selections. So the ethics of weeding calls a couple of things into mind. You have to know, why are we collecting information or books? Because really, as librarians, we're not in the business of books, we're in the business of information. It's just that for so many thousands of years, books have been the handiest way to present that information to people. We need to know why we weed, and your reason for weeding may be very similar or maybe very different from mine. In most of the small libraries that I weed, and it's a matter of space. They don't have a lot of space. They need to maximize their space. I have one library where if they add a new book, they have to pull one out. They're so small. We'll get into some of these questions. Sorry. We'll get into the answers of these questions as we go through. You also need to know, what's the purpose of your library? That can be your mission and vision statement, but without that, you're going to get things for your collection willy-nilly, and you're going to get rid of things through the weeding process willy-nilly. It's awesome if you have a purpose, because then that purpose helps you convey why we need to weed to our community. And I'll touch back with that. Why do we have sacred items in the library? My first year as a director at Great Bend, I had to haul something off to the Goodwill in Hutchinson. We couldn't have put it in the Goodwill in Great Bend. It was a 5-foot Chinese junk ship that somebody had made, but there was no provenance on it. It had shown up next to the drop box one day, but it was so wonderful, nobody would throw it away. And so I hauled it off, and they were really excited when they saw it. And hopefully it didn't go to another library. But what are the sacred cows in your library? If you know, then you can work with that. What will you tell your community about weeding? This is very, very important, especially if you haven't weeded in a while and you need to do a heavy weed. My first year as the director of the Great Bend Public Library, we weeded over 20,000 items. The library had been not properly weeded for about 20 years. We were stuck in a poverty mentality. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I think one of the most important things after communicating your weeding with your community is, how are you going to dispose of those discards? Are you going to recycle them? Are you going to call, and I don't know up in your neck of the woods, in my neck of the woods here, there's a guy in Hutch we can call, or an organization in Wichita. They'll come to the library and get your boxed up items, and then they go back and they rehabilitate and train people recently released from the criminal system, the prison system, to learn how to sell things online. And we believe that's something great to support. Before you even start buying anything for the library or checking it out or weeding it, you need a really good policy. The policy must include your library name. You need to know the reason for this policy. The policy has to say what the purpose of your collection is. If you're an academic library or a school library, you're collecting very differently than a public library. A public library, again, is not a museum, but what is the purpose of your collection? What do you want to achieve with it? What does your town or your community need from your collection? You need to put in some basic selection guidelines. I'm not so keen on, in a policy, putting, I'm using this source for selecting, I'm using book list, or I'm using a school library journal to do children's things, or I'm using the New York Times bestseller list. I think that in a policy, I like to keep that a little bit more vague. And that way, and the reason is because your choices will change on a regular basis. One of the things that we do here is we use Ingram, and right in Ingram, there are all of the great reviews are right there at our point of acquisition, and that really helps us choose. You need to know what you're going to collect, your basic selection guides, what you're going to collect. Are you building a research library? Is your library for a little bit of research and for a lot of entertainment. The libraries that we're building now are very different than the libraries that were built when our buildings were first established as libraries. In that policy, it needs to clearly state who has the responsibility for the collection. That should be the library director. The authority in the policy should be given to them from the library board. No library board should be looking over your purchases. You should not have to put out a list of preview books and lay them on the table so the board can look through them and say, yes, we want you to buy this one or we don't want that one. That is not the board's job. If the board is doing that, they don't have time to do their own job. Purchasing for the collection is delegated to the library director. The library director can delegate it further on down the line, say to an adult services or a youth services or a teen services librarian. It'll be specific to your library. When you have that responsibility and authority in your collection management policy, if you get a really eager board member who really wants to have a lot of input into what you buy, you can point back to that policy that says the board has given this responsibility and authority to the librarian. Also in your policy, and this is another one I keep just a little vague, is your weeding and your deselection. What are going to be the parameters that you weed and remove things from your collection? Also, at what point will you replace materials? I think that those are both good things to have in the policy. I sent to Dan and Jesse a whole bunch of sample policies, and they can make that available to you. If you don't have one, you don't need to start from scratch. They're in Word documents. They can send you 3 or 4 of them, the ones that they think might work best for your library, and away you go. And I know that your NECL staff will be really glad to help you craft a good policy. I've been teaching the collection management part of Apple for a number of years now. And sometimes there's a library that has an amazing policy, but most of the time they can use a little touch up. And I'm sure if you think yours is good, send it to your NECL staff and they'll do a policy audit for you. Other core components in a policy should be, what are you going to do with gifts and donations, both of money and materials? I used to work at an Air Force Base library in Nevada before I came to Kansas. And we would get a lot of donations of money, but they were specified that they could only be used on materials. We didn't have money to process those materials. And so we had all this new stuff sitting on the back shelf that we couldn't process and send out. We worked very hard to let people know that we needed gifts without specifications. Materials is very important when it comes to donations and gifts. You may have a very prominent member in your community with very eclectic reading tastes who always wants to donate brand new books. They've read them once, they're done with them. You need to hold that book in your hand. You need to look in your next catalog and see if there are any other copies there. You need to evaluate it for condition. It may be brand new, but he may have been eating fried chicken when he was eating it. And to me, the most important thing is, if I had to buy this book with my collection dollars right now, would I buy it to add to the collection? And a lot of people will use the 5 patron rule. Can I think of 5 patrons who are going to read this? It's not free to add a donation to the catalog. In the 80s, they did a very detailed experiment. We are library scientists after all. And they found out that in the 1980s, it cost $10 to add any item to the collection. I'd say that's doubled by now, probably even higher. It costs money to add donations to the collection. Make sure you're adding top-notch stuff. Your policy needs to say what you're going to do with your surplus materials and properties. How are you going to dispose of them? You must have a reconsideration or a challenged materials policy. In that policy component, it needs to say what the patron should do and what the library's response to that is. You also need to make sure you train any library staff on what their immediate response is when someone comes in and slams a book down and says, I don't think this should be in the library. This is the time for scripted language. You don't want your part-time teenage clerk to be the only one there and be stumbling and trying to do the best they can. Give your staff tools, and that's what policy does. It gives them tools to work in situations. I often liken it to a safety net. Our librarians out on that front line are often like trapeze artists, and the policies are their safety net. It doesn't have to be in the policy, but I believe it should be included, and that is the freedom to read statement and the freedom to view statement. One of the reasons that I do like to put it in policy is because every 3 years, my board members review and update, if necessary, policies. That way I know that every 3 years, I left out the Library Bill of Rights, they know that our library supports the Library Bill of Rights, the freedom to read and the freedom to view. Because we go over those regularly, our board members understand that we may buy things that not everyone in the community would approve of. They understand if we do get a reconsideration request or a challenge to a book, they understand under which parameters we're operating. And that is the Library Bill of Rights, freedom to read and freedom to view. Sandra Nelson, who is a really amazing national trainer for librarians, says that if a board member cannot support the Library Bill of Rights, freedom to read and freedom to view, they have no business being on the library board. These are basic tenets for us. And the last thing that should be on the policy is the date that it was approved, and then the last date that it was reviewed and updated. And I say updated because sometimes a format may change and you have to change it from VHS to DVD, or if you include the Library Bill of Rights, something may have gone on in the world where they update it a little bit. It's important to not just review, but to update.
Gail, I know most people seem to be pretty familiar with the freedom to read, but would you talk a little bit about the freedom to view just real quickly?
Yes, I will. If you're familiar with freedom to read, freedom to view is the same thing, but with what you watch. And so I think that this is a very important one because librarians really understand that they shouldn't be placing judgments on what their patrons are reading, no matter the age of their patron. And that judgment can be placed in where you shelve things, like behind the desk or on the top shelves. That is censorship in a very, very basic way. Freedom to view, every library patron should be allowed to borrow whatever it is that they want to borrow. That may mean that you have a 6-year-old coming in to borrow an R-rated movie. We don't know why that 6-year-old is borrowing that R-rated movie. Maybe mommy's out in the car with a sick baby and said, go in and get my movie for me, honey. We don't serve as that child's parent. We don't make judgments on what they view. One of the things I see libraries doing a lot that violates this freedom to view is they're going to shelve movies by the MPAA rating, or they're going to put the MPAA rating on the spine label. It's important for you to know that that MPAA rating is copyrighted. You have no permission to use that on your shelving labels or on your spine labels. You are really violating a copyright. MPAA is a private organization. It is not a government organization. And yes, I am on my soapbox. If you hear it in my voice, yes, I am. I feel very strongly about that because people can get into a lot of trouble that way. And I don't want you to do that. I'll send your NECL staff an email that I recently sent out to somebody talking about using those movie ratings in libraries. And yes, I know that Demco sells stickers with the movie ratings on them. They're certainly able to do that, but that doesn't make it right for you. And it doesn't suddenly make that copyright go away.
Gail, gosh,
Yes.
obviously this is a good topic.
It
So
could be a whole
Gina,
webinar.
somebody did ask, yeah, so Gina, you would not want to use those ratings. And also, there's another reason, as one of our library directors has pointed out to us recently, and frequently actually, that very well violates ALA's labeling policy as well.
Yes, it does.
So you really want to stick away from that. And Tracy from Carbondale is moving into a shiny new building. And yes, everybody has an opinion on the shelving and what's going to go on it. That's
Yes.
Grandma
Now,
is
do you guys have
excited
me
to see her
spotlighted?
romance novel collection. So yeah, we're gonna have to work on that. And the policy is definitely the place to
Yes.
start.
Do you guys have me spotlighted? Can you all see me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Because I have this I'm going to do in a little bit.
Yes,
Connie.
yes, Connie, I think you do need to remove
Yes.
those stickers. You do. Obviously it's not like you need to close the library until you get them off of there. But yeah, we need to move away from that.
Before
I had
you
a question,
do that,
Gail, and I don't know if it's
hold on a
the
minute,
right-
Dan. Connie, before you remove those stickers,
Yeah.
you need to educate your board about this, because they're going to be your best advocates for doing this once you've educated your board about it. Because people are going to say why, and the simple matter is we've recently learned that we're violating copyright by using these. That's real easy, but your board needs to have a greater understanding of that through freedom to view. Go ahead, Dan.
So I'm in a continuing education class about space planning, and our professor has written a book that's not quite been released yet, but it's all about space planning, and she really focuses on collection development as the first step in space planning. Get all the junk out before you try to make room for it. But she said that in the policy, to go into the collection and say what parts of the actual collection, if you're going to have like a small, medium, or large inventory for each of those sections. Mm-hmm. So I guess you would go say, we will have a very large Western collection for our library because that's what's really popular, but we'll have, a really small graphic novel collection. Do you have any thoughts on that, Gail, about how or you might address that?
Well, to me, it's almost two questions. One is, are you space planning and you're starting from the ground up? Definitely you need a plan, and determining what size your collection is going to be for each component is critical. I'm going to talk about it from a place where you're already in the building and you want to make some changes. You've decided that you need more floor space for programming. And the only way you're going to get that is by removing some of your shelving units. And so what you need to look at when you evaluate the collection is what is used the most, how old is it, do we have enough books for our community? There's a whole bunch of questions you ask yourself, and then you're going to determine the size you need for each component. You're going to use your existing statistics and your existing data to help you determine that. And also the biggest thing that I would say is that you need to be really flexible, because if 10 years ago your Western readers was the bulk of your patronage and they needed more space, that might not be the case now or 5 years from now. And so you need to be flexible. A sad part is that most people in the library profession are not good with change. And we're a profession that changes constantly. And so you kind of have to get used to that. This isn't carved in stone. What are we going to do? And how are we going to change it? What's our end date? When are we going to look at this again and reevaluate? And Laura is correct. Having the movie ratings is a procedural issue, not a policy statement. But I would still recommend that before you start removing stickers, talk to your board about it and get them in the know, so you don't get a newspaper reporter coming in and saying, oh, the library is doing this and it's horrible.
So we can address Gina's question really quickly. She's asking, can I have a different label? Can I make my own label and keep them in a separate section? I don't think there's probably an issue
No.
with that, as far as, but I think you need to be sure that you're not crossing that line into censorship that Gail kind of touched on.
Yes.
So if you're moving that to a different place, is it still accessible to the person that has every right to check it out?
Right. Is it accessible to everyone? An important part about a library collection is crew. And we are keen on our acronyms, and this is a good one. It is an ongoing or a continuous review, evaluation, and weeding. This is how we deal with our collection. Oh, where am I going here? I'm trigger happy. Okay, there are benefits of weeding, and this is where I'll have you look at my picture. And this is a good one for shelf planning and space planning. Is this, so I have to line myself up just right. From the tip of this thumb to the tip of the pinky, and my hands are big, your hands may be smaller. Every library shelf should have that much empty space. There's a couple of reasons for it. It makes it easier for patrons to pull out books without that avalanche. It makes it so much easier for your shelvers to put away things. So when you have this much space, you're saving time, which is money. It also, okay, avalanche, shelving. Oh, if you're pulling the holds queue, it's a lot faster to pull the holds queue if you've got space to pull one thing out from that shelf list. Weeding saves time of the user. The truth is that a lot of what we weed, we think is still good, but it's not. If our users have to sort through a lot of stuff, that's not really great. And George, I'm thinking of the Moscow Library. A lot of stuff. In some places they had shelves double stacked. That's why I can reference that. It takes a lot more time for everyone. Everyone is attracted to what is new. Psychologists have done all kinds of experiments on this, and we all like bright, shiny new things. At the Greatman Library, I mentioned before, we weeded 20,000 items in my first year here. We were able to bring 3/4 of our shelves down from 8 foot high to 4 foot high. People didn't comment on all the books that were gone. What they commented on was all the new stuff we had, and we hadn't even started to purchase yet. But they could see things that were of a better quality, and our circulation almost doubled that year alone. The benefits of weeding is that it will enhance your library's reputation. Your patrons will come to know that what you carry is reliable. You don't have the 1992 book on AIDS for children. You have current, valuable, reliable information. They'll know that you're a trusted source for information because you've got the good stuff. You don't have your shelves full of things that have been proven to be bad. Connie Weber says she had a person one time tell her she couldn't get rid of Danielle Steele books. So yeah, yes, you can. You can do that. And when you're in a consortium, you can also broker inside deals with other libraries. You can say, listen, I'll keep all the Danielle Steele if you'll keep all the James Patterson. You don't have to keep everything. Work together. I'm just going to keep my hands off this mouse. So I referenced earlier the victim and poverty mentality. And this is harsh, but it's true. This specifically is about purchasing and donating. These are all things I really have heard. This is not made up stuff. If I weed the library, we're not going to have anything left. Well, maybe that's your reality, and that lets you start collecting what's good. If I don't add donations to the library, we're not going to get any new stuff. Seriously, is that 1952 book something that you get donated? Are you going to consider that new to your library when in our consortium catalog there are already 20 copies of it? And again, I talked about so-and-so donating this to the library and letting their feelings will be hurt if I don't add it to the collection. I would then ask so-and-so if they would also give you at least $20 so you can process that item, and they're going to take a different look at that treasure that came out of the garage. My board doesn't want me to weed the collection, and this is you as a librarian, and you'll be relying on your staff to do that. The board needs to be educated about why it's critical to weed the library. Oftentimes board members will come on to the board, the library board, because they love to read, or they have very fond memories of the library and they want, you know, it's nostalgia. But they need to be educated about why weeding is an important part of the library, of the process. I'm having trouble speaking today. Okay. Weeding does not have to be emotional. I find it particularly difficult for librarians to weed if they've been in place for a while. And that would be then that I am here and I purchased that book and it wasn't really as popular as I thought, or maybe it's only gone out just a few times, or maybe nobody checked it out. I can't let my feelings get hurt by that. Every once in a while, you know, we're going to make a bad call. That's life. Using the criteria that I'm going to talk about soon and now helps you pull out emotionally from that decision to weed. So Dan talked about musty. These are subjective criteria. If it's misleading or inaccurate, you should not have books in your computer on DOS, in your library on DOS, or earlier versions of Windows. You should not have books on medical treatments from decades ago. You should not have, there's a lot of things that are just, okay, you shouldn't have anything that's ugly. This is where I empower the circulation staff. They are the ones who check in, check out. There should be a shelf behind their desk or a cart or whatever it is, where after they've checked something in, if they question if it should still be in the collection, they're going to put it on that cart or that shelf. This is where all ugly things should go. It could just be that it's the old original cover of Nancy Drew and not the new cover of Nancy Drew. It could be the Hardy Boys. It could be the Babysitters Club. It could be most anything that's going to be considered to be ugly. If it's in bad shape, absolutely it should go on the shelf, and then the supervisor or the manager or the director, whoever has the authority to weed, they're going to make the final decision on that. But the director should never be the one out there doing all the weeding. That is, unless you are the only person in the library, there are other people who can do that for you. And then when that cart is full or that shelf is full, they'll say, hey, Gail, I need you to take a look at this. And I go, boom, boom, boom. The books that are down can stay, everything else can go, and they weed them for me. That's not something I don't need to be there with my list out walking the shelves. If anything is superseded, and this is where encyclopedias come into play. As soon as an encyclopedia is put into print, it's out of date. If it is trivial, like one of the books my colleagues has is on roller disco. And so that would be considered a trivial book and shouldn't really be in your library, unless in your town you have a great passion for roller disco and everybody's into it, then it's no longer trivial in your town. Is it irrelevant? Is it available elsewhere? And if you're in a small library, I really, really suggest you use this as a criteria. Check, share it, check your consortium catalog. If you're really limited on shelving space, you need to be careful there. Connie gives anyone who brings in donations the speech, and that is that if we can't do it, what are we going to do with it? And unless you'd like it back, nobody wants it back. Yes, George, you should not have the 2012 study guide for the GRE. And Kia says, should we be weeding those irrelevant books when people are still checking it out? I have people who want a book on an outdated version of Mac because they don't necessarily know the difference, for example. Our weeding is done heavily by circulation rate, but if it is incredibly out of date, I want to get rid of it. And yes, you should. If you'll look, you'll see the computer people shaking their heads. Yes, you should get rid of it. Wrong one. Where am I? There I am. Okay. So when you use musty, you can also use this formula. It's the XX musty. The first X stands for copyright date. Is it more than X years old? The second X is the maximum permissible time without use. So you've got, these are objective criteria, and this helps really to take the emotion out of it. If you're an archive library, you're going to have things with copyright dates from the 1800s, early 1900s, right up till now, but I don't think any of us are. Some of us are depository libraries, and that's a different thing. For us at Great Bend, we do change our copyright date depending on what section of nonfiction we're in. We have very old Bibles. Those are still good. That wording hasn't really changed much. We also have newer versions. But if we're in the science, health, or computer section of nonfiction, we're looking at that copyright date as less than 5 years ago. So a book may be beautiful, but it's out because it's out of date. The second X is that maximum permissible time without use. How long are we going to let something sit on the shelf, taking up space without earning that space? This is where things like sewing books and craft books and cookbooks come in. And for me, those are all difficult to weed. But when I use that second X, that makes a difference. And after copyright date, maximum permissible time, you still apply musty to those as well. So this again helps take that emotion out. So this chart here is amazing. And your Nichols crew have the slideshow, so you'll be able to see this big and print this out. This is amazing. So it goes through the Dewey classifications, through all of them, and then it offers you the crew formula. So in the Dewey class of 004, it says the copyright date shouldn't be older than 3 years. You're going to determine how long it can sit on the shelf, but still use musty. So if you go to the 930s or the 990s, they're recommending 930s to 990s. Copyright not older than 10 years. It shouldn't sit on the shelf unused for 3 years. You still apply musty. For fiction, that's where you get to decide for yourself. You're going to determine what's the copyright rate, but it still shouldn't sit on the shelf for more than 2 years being unused. That's where you might not have to keep all the Danielle Steele books again. And when you have somebody saying, you can't weed those, we read them, that's where you say, I'll be glad to get anything you want, and I can have that here for you and you know how long it takes for you to borrow things and get them from the courier. Children's books, we have to be much more deliberate about, and we're going to come into that later, but look at the YA or the teen fiction. If the copyright is older than 3 years, if it's sat on the shelf for 2 years, or if it's musty, Crew recommends that it be weeded. Your teens aren't going to want to read an old version of something. That's not to say you're not going to have some classics in there. You are, but they're going to be the newer versions with newer pictures. When we talk about non-print and film, we start using, see, trigger happy. We start using worst. Worst is for media. It's not worst like German worst, but if it is out of date, it's going to start stinking like worst. This is a different worst. Think about your DVDs. Is it worn out? Is it out of date? Is it rarely used, supplied elsewhere, or is it trivial or faddish? So you may have a Christmas music collection and you bring it out every December and it checks out in December. And then in January, February, when everything comes back and you start to put it away, you're going to go through that collection with worst. Is it worn out? Does it have scratches? People say, oh, you know, this doesn't play anymore. Or is the headliner just in bad shape? Is it out of date? Is it, well, now the Chipmunks are back in fashion again, but is it the Chipmunks singing their Christmas songs, the original version? You'll know what this is about. If you're still circulating VHS, you're going to use worst for that. And you're also going to use Crew, because most people aren't really borrowing VHS. And I think if you run your numbers, you'll find that's the case for you as well. Okay, When do we weed materials that haven't been used? We've purchased them, they're kind of sitting on the shelves. If it's not circulated for 3 to 5 years, if you've got duplicate copies and it's no longer needed, say you bought a lot of copies for your book club and there are 15 copies on your shelf and nobody's borrowing them, you can get rid of those older copies, the excess copies. This is so hard. Are there unused volumes in sets or series? With this, that bullet point right there, you're going to get people who are either on one side, yes, get rid of it, or people who know you need to keep the whole series intact. You're going to need to figure out your reasoning why, and you're going to be able to explain it to people. If an item was a hot topic more than 5 years ago, maybe it's time to weed it. When I came to the system 13 years ago, in the rotating collection, there were autobiographies on Oksana Bayul. That was the most recent one, and that was very old. It needed to go. And if the formats are no longer popular and they're not being used. When do you weed for poor content? This is the easiest one. First off, if it's out of date or obsolete in these topics: computers, law, science, space, health, technology, and travel. If it's outdated pop culture, if you still have books on the monkeys, it's probably time to let those go. If it's inaccurate or false. If it's a repetitious series, and here I remind you again, check your catalog. You can have duplicates that you don't need. If the librarian before you accepted every donation and every self-published or small press title and added those to collection and they're not circulating, or any gifts or donations that are not circulating, it's time to weed. By appearance, if they're worn out, ratty, scratched, they stink, the quality of the pictures is fading, let them go. Children's books is different. I want you to be thinking of a really high quality boutique. Think of an expensive children's bookstore. That's what your children's collection should look like. Of course, board books see a lot of teeth and they need to be replaced more often than not. Replace worn copies of favorites. We have to replace our copies of Laura Ingalls Wilder, Anne of Green Gables, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, lots of them, because kids deserve a newer and fresher looking book. George, are we simpatico on the brain today, the chipmunks? Oh, now you're on to the, okay, I'll come up with some more music for you, George. In the young adult section, you need to be ruthless. It needs to be current. If it is a classic, you need the new version. Why not buy paperbacks if you're going to be weeding them? If it's older than 5 years, remove it if it's not circulating, and be very selective and get rid of those things with outdated cover art. Okay, the title on this one is a little wonky. It's a suggested weeding schedule. I couldn't come up with a better title for it, but if you've got a small library, and you'll know if you're small, I would suggest that you systematically work your way through the entire library every year. You have less shelf space is the reason for that. In a medium library, you should weed the entire library every other year. So that means that every year you're going to get through about half of your collection. And a larger library is going to take much longer to get through that. So this schedule assumes that a small library has less employees, a smaller collection, and less space. You'll do an ongoing weeding schedule because of these parameters. So this came from the best thing I ever think was on the net, and it is gone, and it is even gone from the Wayback Machine. It was the Sunflower Link Weeding Link of the Month. It was for a school library, and she had done it in a series of 9 months, where every month, here's what you would be working on. So if you've got a smaller collection, and even if it's just you, you can see where you could work your way through this collection. In January, you're going to work on fiction A to F for adults, and in kids, you're going to work on easy and juvenile A to G. In February, you're going to go on to something else. It has you weeding a little bit in the summer, but not much, because I know what you're working on this summer and you're busy. even if you're not having in-house programming. And it lets you finish up in December with just working through the 920s, 921s, or no weeding. This is a great schedule. At my actual library, we follow this schedule, and it means that about every second year we get through all the collection. My employees know that if they've had to heavily weed a section of the collection, it's up to me to get more money to repopulate that collection. But this is a very practical sort of thing. A document that I'm working on now is, especially in those nonfiction things, what kinds of things are red lights? What should we be looking for specifically? And that's, I think, something that will be very valuable. And I'll share that out when I get that. Okay, so a weeding plan. Any kind of weeding is better than nothing. Please, please don't leave your collection a mess for the next person. It's hard enough to be a new library director without having a collection that's in a tangle as well. Although if you're a new librarian, one of the very first things I suggest is get out there and get your hands on that collection and weed. Even if you're just weeding on condition, weed. You're going to feel like you've really accomplished something. And you need those big wins when you're a new library director. Your nonfiction collection does not need to be full of things. We in Kansas are blessed to have wonderful, wonderful databases, and there are so many amazing online resources. What you may want to do is make some marketing materials to put in your nonfiction selection to know, let those patrons know there are resources for what you're looking for. Here you go, here's an example, or come ask me and we can dive deeper into this. It is far better to lack books and have empty shelves than to have shelves filled with bad or unsafe information. That doesn't just include medical books, it includes books on health topics, and it includes cookbooks as well. That's a hard thing, but there are some cookbooks that just offer really bad advice. To take the emotion out of weeding, use your CREW guidelines by the Dewey classification for all nonfiction. Nonfiction books are expensive. It is really hard to weed something that you purchased for $60 to $80 and it didn't get used. Take the emotion out of it and weed frequently, because then the job actually becomes lighter. Touched it again. Okay, remember this. Anything is not better than nothing. Far better for you to have nothing in the, I can't think of, 700s, that would be mean, but 700s than for you to have stuff that's crap. Know those online resources and help your patrons learn about them and how to use them. Use the CREW deadlines. That is it. I think I am done. Okay, I am. What time is it? Oh man, I raced. Good job. Okay.
Yeah, that was.
I did race. This is going to be available, so you can go through it a little slower, but I'm available to you. If you have any questions, you can certainly give me a call or send me an email as well. And I know that your Nichols crew is awesome and they will also help answer any questions for you. I love working with them.
So is anybody here, participants, any questions that while we are focusing still on Gail's, what she's brought to us? And like she said, we can continue to talk about this after today. Mike McDonald put in the chat, Nichols folks, this is the method we use.
Yes.
I think I first heard about CREW from Mike McDonald before I started library school a few years ago. So yeah, this is definitely in sync with our mindset. Yeah, I think this is relevant to all of us. Clearly it is, you know. All right, it doesn't see anything besides thanks and how helpful this was. So we were going to let George just talk a little bit about some reports, or one report, I think it is. So take it away, George. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, there are a couple of things that we have going for us that make weeding slightly kind of a little bit easier in one respect. And that is that if you mark anything as missing, 13 months later, it's going to be weeded whether you want it to or not. Anything with the lost status that's been lost for more than 13 months will be automatically deleted from your collection. And so one of the things that Dan mentioned earlier is, we've gone to a couple of libraries and helped them by doing an inventory. I know Atchison did an inventory earlier this year. Lansing has, in the time I've been here, done 2 inventories. And McLeod has done one, and it seems like Effingham did one earlier this year too, when they had a lot of time. And there's a method that I have used for a long time for inventorying that I call the quick and dirty inventory method. And it works really well at smaller libraries. It would be hard to implement at a library like Leavenworth. It took a lot of effort at Lansing. But the way that it works is if you want to do something like this, you let me know. And a day or two before you're ready to do the inventory, I go into the catalog and I figure out everything that's supposed to be checked in on the shelf at your library, and I mark it all as missing. And then on the day that you do the inventory, you just get volunteers together with barcode scanners and laptops and check in every item that's supposed to be there on the shelf. And when you're done, by checking them in, you're clearing the missing status. So anything at the end of the day that you haven't checked in is still marked as missing. And so then you know what's actually where it is supposed to be on the shelf and what isn't there. And if you do nothing else, 13 months later, all of those things that are missing are just going to be automatically deleted. So it's a way of making what you have on the shelf match what the catalog says you have on the shelf. And that's something that, the first one I did here in Kansas was at McLeod, and it was just me and the director, and it took us like about 8 hours. When we did it at Lansing is the biggest library that's done it. Although actually Atchison would be better, but I didn't actually go to Atchison and help them because of COVID, but it's something they had their staff do when they were closed for the COVID thing. But at Lansing, they had some volunteers from the Friends of the Library, and they had all the staff, and they were closed for the day. And we had laptops and barcode scanners, and we just went around the building and checked everything in 2-person teams. One person to pull the book off the shelf, somebody else to scan it and put it in, and then they would put it back. And it went pretty quickly. We did 20,000 items in about 6 hours at Lansing.
I would just interject at that point, since if you have people who are doing that scanning who can at least then do musty at that point, and make sure that stuff that's clearly shouldn't be in the collection, that's that time that you don't scan it, just to make that clear, that goes into a box or whatever, so that, because it's a good opportunity, you're not going to put garbage back on the shelf.
Yeah, I was looking up here on my shelf to see if I had that book from the one library we went to that was a 1948 children's book that had the really racist images of Native Americans in it. That was a perfect time to get rid of that. It's like we scanned it and checked it in and said, you know what, not a good one to keep.
We had baseball rules from the 1920s. And it really should have been in a museum, not in a library, but no museum wanted it because it had library markings all over it. But we said, we're playing by different rules now.
Yes. So that's one thing that you can do as a step towards weeding. I don't have the ability to share my screen here. I do. And which screen do I want to share? This one. So you guys should see the reports page. Have I got the right screen shared?
Yes.
Okay. So the all-purpose reading report is 2731. This is the other tool that you've got here. This is called Flexible Shelf List Report. And if you click on Run, it gives you a ton of options. So I see at the top of my page, I see Shay here from Williamsburg. So I'm going to run this report for Williamsburg. And that's the first thing you can select here is item home library. So I'm going to drop down to Williamsburg. And then from here, you've got the ability to, you can focus in on a specific part of the collection to generate a shelf list for, or if all I do is choose the library and click run the report, it's going to give you a list of everything at your library. But if I just want to look at adult items, I can click on adult and it's just going to give me the items with the adult shelving location. If I just want to look at books, I can look at just things with the item type book. Now that, like I said in our most recent meeting, if I want to look at video, I can do an item type that shows all the different video item types we have.
Nice.
So I can do all kinds of limits on this, or you can, when you run it, you can also limit by collection code. And so if you just want to limit to, like if you're only interested in looking at your Game Boy collection to see what what that collection looks like. For this, I think let's just to make it easier, I'm going to do Williamsburg adult. Each of these, you know, can limit what you're doing in the report more and more. So if we want to look at things, only look at things that were added between certain dates, you can put a start date and an end date here. So let's say we're at Williamsburg, we're looking for adult, and we're looking for large print. And we want to look at any items that were added that are large print that are more than, let's go back 3 years, anything added before October 1st, 2017. And if we run the report, it's a big report and it takes a minute or so to run. Depending on the more stuff you've got in that collection, the longer it's going to take to run. But when you get the results, it's going to have a link to the title. Each title in here, if you click on this far left column, it can actually take you out to that bibliographic record. But it'll have the barcode number, the home branch, the holding branch, the location information. It'll have everything you need to find that item on the shelf. It'll have the publication year. It'll have the date added, date last borrowed, date last seen. It's going to say it's been checked out 8 times. It's been renewed once. That's a total of 9 circs on that item. It's not checked out now, and it doesn't have any status problems. And it will even go over here and show you the replacement cost, how many copies you have at your library, and how many copies that exist in the entire catalog. So, and it'll have that for each item in that collection. For this, there are 578 items that meet those criteria at Williamsburg at the moment. So you can download this as a spreadsheet, and then you can look through there and you can know exactly what it is in that collection. Once you get it into Excel, you can further refine this by, you know, adding filters and saying, you know, I just want to see the things that have never checked out. Of those 578 items, there are 49 of those that are more than 3 years old and they've never checked out. So right there is a good list for where to start weeding, if those are going to be your criteria for what you want to weed. So this is, like I said, this is report number 2731. And when you run it, it does give you a lot of options, but you can actually say, show me only things where there are at least 2 copies in the catalog total. You can tell it to just show me things that have checked out fewer than 5 times. All of these limits are right there and they're available. And if any of this is confusing to you, you can ask and I can help you figure out how to set it up for the collection that you wanna weed. Or you can just do it for the whole library put it all into Excel, and then you can go from there and filter it in Excel. But that's report number 2731, and it's really the Swiss Army knife of weeding reports.
Thanks, George. I think that's everything besides my reminder about the director meeting in December. If you came late, you might not have heard that we're having our version of an ugly sweater contest. And yeah, CKLS did give me the idea because I saw they were having an ugly sweater contest in December. And I was like, oh, fits in with collection development. So our mustiest books is what we're voting on. So if you find a book while you're weeding that you're like, this is sure to win an ugly book or ugly DVD contest, it can be any kind of media that you have at your library. I suppose even a cake pan would qualify for this. I think we'd use musty for cake pans, not worst. So take a picture of it, send it over to me. The directors who attend will vote, and the winner first, second, and third at least. And there might even be some, thanks to Robin, offering also some Starbucks cards. So if we don't get very many, every submission may be a winner. So definitely, if you're not a director, let your director know that you're sending that in so that they know to vote for you, because that's money for the library, or for your director, I don't know. Okay, so thank you so much, Gail, Santy, for joining us today and just presenting all that information for us and bundling it up in a nice package with a bow so that we can all look at it again, because it's one of those things that I know we'll go back to. Yeah, thank you so much. Everybody's chiming in on that. So, and we hope we can, Gail does a talk about going like collection development 2.0, where once you've already gone and done that ruthless weeding, she then has all kinds of, what would you say, like reports?
Well, what we do is you take reports like the awesome one that George has, and you run it through different formulas, and it just takes weeding and collection development to a whole nother level. I call it 2.0.
Right.
And not for beginners.
So we kind of told Gail that, you know, we probably wanted her to bring that in some kind of form in 2021, but we haven't nailed her down yet. We also, as you saw, that we called this part 1. So part 2 in our minds that we're for 2021 that we've talked about, Jesse and I, is doing a panel discussion with libraries and going it from those who've done their weeding and kind of look at it from that perspective. So all of that, but so that we're leaving you with a charge to go into your stacks and weed, and we'll be here to help if you need us, either by phone. Right now, it's really hard to get a lot of people hands in a collection, but you know, let us know. Even in the past, what we've done is working within the county. So if you are an Osage County person, you can call CARS and they can come in and help, and then you're going to help them with their collection when it's time to do those. One final point that I almost forgot to mention is you might have seen that we can help you recycle your books. So this is keeping them out of landfills. Let us know. Actually contact Caroline Handwork, and she will get you the information to get you so that you can get a U-Haul and bring it to Lawrence to the KU recycling facility. And that way we don't have to throw away any books. And I'm guilty of it. Because I just didn't have any other options, and people gave me a trunk full of books and said, please take them out of my town, because if they don't leave Winchester, they'll come back into the library. So use the recycling if we have to. There's Better World books. If you need more information about what you can do with those, please let us know, because I know friends groups, if you have one, they'll take those books and they might get a special shelf in your library to make a little moolah back on it. But please, if it's a bad information book, it's got to go. Don't give it to your friends group. Just do your part to get those out of circulation.
Don't advertise it on Can Libel.
Right. Now that you've been here, you'll see some of those and you'll be like, oh my gosh, what are they? That is their garbage. They're trying to get me to take their garbage.
Exactly right. And you have to pay for it through the courier? No. Nope.
Don't take it. Okay. Final time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you to our presenters and all of our NECL staff who's come here to listen in. We're all here for you. Let's get it cleaned up together. Everything will be shared with our whole group here in the coming days. All right.
Awesome.
I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thanks, Gail.
Absolutely.
Well, well done, George and Gail.